Hi, I'm Josh Reinstein. I'm the president of the Israel Allies Foundation and director of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus.
Josh, it is really great to be with you today. Why don't you tell listeners a little bit about what your organization does in Israel and with the partnership in the United States?
Well, you're here now in the Knesset, the beacon of democracy in the Middle East. It's actually the only free democracy. Israel is the only free democracy in the Middle East. And in 2004, the Knesset made a decision to create something called the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. And this was a group of members of Knesset from left to right, religious, secular, that worked to build direct relationships with Christian leaders around the world. This later on turned into what we call faith-based diplomacy, when people take their biblical support and turn it into real political action. From this establishment of a caucus here, our first sister caucus was established in 2006 in Washington, called the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus. Still today, the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus is the only bipartisan pro-Israel caucus in Washington, D.C. And that establishment of a sister caucus led to a domino effect of caucuses being established around the world. So today we actually have 53 caucuses in 53 countries, 1,500 legislators in our network that works in what we call faith-based diplomacy. And today, faith-based diplomacy is the greatest weapon that Israel has in its diplomatic arsenal. It's the reason we have embassies in Jerusalem again. It's the reason we have anti-Semitism legislation, anti-BDS legislation. It's even the reason we have observer status in the African Union. It's all because Christians have got involved in the political process and brought their countries along with them.
I think many in America would be a little bit surprised to realize how formalized a Christian alliance has become in Israeli politics. Was there a concerted resistance movement to overcome, or did that just happen naturally without any type of opposition?
Well, when we started the caucus in 2004, there was opposition from all parties. It was a new thing. It was something that people didn't know about. There was a lot of mistrust. We had a situation where the religious didn't want to do it in the Knesset because they were worried of missionary activity. The secular didn't want to do it because they wanted a separation of politics and state. The left wing didn't want to do it because they thought it was something too to the right. And even the right wing here were suspicious of this new alliance because they thought maybe that this would pigeonhole them as being too to the right, because our right in Israel is different from conservative elements abroad. It's more based on defense. So there was a lot of opposition to building this new relationship between Jews and Christians in the 21st century at the beginning. The way we got around that is we actually stole the idea from the American system, and we created the first caucus. So before that, we had lobbies where there would be outside organizations putting pressure on politicians to do something. What we did was we created a caucus, which is a member of elected members that come together on a specific issue. So there isn't pressure from the outside. And when they came together on the issue of working with Christians, they were happy to create this in a caucus format. What they found out very fast was that this wasn't a means to an end. This wasn't a controversial issue. Christians really were our best friends. They really were genuinely supportive of Israel. They really loved the God of Israel, the Bible of Israel, the people of Israel. And when they understood that, then it became very easy. And now today you can see that, every ministry has a outreach to Christians. Every organization, Christians are revered here in Israel as our greatest supporters around the world. I think it really hit home during the embassy move. I was at the event to mark the embassy move in Jerusalem from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem of the U.S. Embassy, and of the 800 people there, 700 of them were Christian leaders. And so people understood that it's Christians, not countries, that stand with Israel today.
So talk about some of the things that you're seeing take place in America under the Joe Biden administration that seem concerning or threatening in terms of Judeo-Christian agendas and relationships going forth in Israel.
Look, we're very concerned. Israel has always been a bipartisan issue. We've always had Republican support because of Bible-believing Christians, and we've always had Democratic support because of Jewish support. And we're seeing that that's starting to fray because of the importance of the progressive movement, which is inherently anti-Semitic. So with the squad, with some of the comments that we're seeing from the Democratic leadership, since the outset of October 7th, when we saw incredible support from America, that support has waned as we've gone longer into this battle. And we're seeing it come out in very odd ways. So instead of supporting Israel's right to victory over this terrible terrorist organization, Hamas, that beheaded babies and raped women and kidnapped Holocaust survivors, they're now saying we need to back off, pull off the gas. They've released tens of billions of dollars in sanction release to Iran, and Iran is behind all these attacks. They're coordinating it with the Houthis in Yemen and with Hezbollah in the north, and of course with Hamas in the south. They're even sanctioning Jewish people who live in the communities of Judea and Samaria. Like we're not a place of law and order. We have our own laws and order. We don't need sanctions on a friendly democracy here in the Middle East. And they're not sanctioning the Palestinians that are actually shooting and killing the settlers, or as they call them, the people who live there. So things have changed dramatically over the last 6 months, and people are nervous that maybe Israel's not the bipartisan issue that everyone thought it was.
So you said Judea and Samaria as opposed to West Bank, and I think maybe a lot of Americans don't understand the difference between those labels. Could you explain why it's Judea and Samaria, not West Bank?
Well, it's always been Judea and Samaria. I think we had a great, triumph at the NRB this year when the National Religious Broadcasting Convention passed a resolution saying we'll no longer refer to it in Christian media as the West Bank. Only call it Judea and Samaria from now on. Anyone who has a Bible can open the back of their Bible and see a map of Judea and Samaria. This goes back to the time of the Bible when the Jewish people settled the land. Jews are from Judea. Only after the occupation by Jordan of those lands, after the 1948 and the War of Independence, until we took those lands back in 1967, did people start calling it the West Bank. And what they're trying to say is that all that land to the west of the Jordan River is the West Bank of the Jordan River. The reason they do that is because they're trying to steal the narrative. They know that this land is inherently the land of the Jewish people. You can't deny it if you call it Judah, because that's where Jews come from. It's like saying that Saudi Arabia isn't for Arabs, even though the word Arabia is in it. So they mistakenly, on purpose, call it the West Bank. Now, unfortunately, because they changed the language, a lot of people don't understand even that Judea and Samaria and the West Bank are the same geographical location. So I had the situation where I speak with Christian leaders and they're like, look, give them the West Bank, but we'll keep Judea and Samaria. And they don't realize that's the same area. So I think what we need to do is take the language back. And of course, in Israel, it's a given. We never call it the West Bank, it's Judea and Samaria.
So in America, there have been plenty of pro-Palestinian protests, but really more anti-Israel protests on the college campuses. Talk about the roots of that your caucus sees being the roots of that, and how it's impacting relations in Israel and the Jewish people's regard for America.
Well, look, those demonstrations that we're seeing are not pro-Palestinian. They are anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. The roots is anti-Semitism. And we know that anti-Semitism has been around for a long time. Unfortunately, it's being taught in schools. It's being condoned in schools. Those people are not calling for the freedom of the Palestinian people from Hamas terrorist organization, which is a dictatorship that holds them hostages, uses them as human shields. They're calling for Israel to give up in this fight, even though we were attacked and we're in a defensive war. So the whole idea isn't to help the Palestinian people that are under this horrible tyranny of Hamas, it's to attack Israel. Now, this is not new to us. Anti-Semitism has been around since the time of dawn. It's the rejection of God and God's people. What's new to us is the reaction. And what's so scary about what we're seeing in America is that if this was directed to any other minority in any way, there would be FBI, DOJ, they'd be on the scene arresting all these people. First of all, you're not allowed to give support to a known terrorist organization. Hamas is classified by the U.S. government still today as a terrorist organization. You can't wave the flag of Hamas legally in America, just like you can with ISIS, and they're doing that as well. But secondly, you can't call for the death of the Jewish people. You can't call for the death of a minority. That's a hate crime. And so if you would have called for any other minority, the death of them, immediately there would be a reaction, and we've seen no reaction. Almost none. We saw the hearings in Congress when they talked to the heads of the universities, how are you allowing this to happen? And they said that, until you act on it, calling for genocide is just not an issue. But let's see them call for genocide for women or for African Americans. You'll see immediate reaction. So it's very scary that they can call for genocide of Jews and there's no reaction at all.
Does Israel, either here in the Knesset or out on the street, speaking to the Israeli people, does Israel feel that America now, under Joe Biden, is turning its back on the Jewish nation?
Well, I think there's a few feelings. Okay, so first of all, Israel knows that America is our greatest ally. You know, the people of America are very supportive. We're the only two countries that are founded on Judeo-Christian principles, so we have a kinship. You know, in America, if you go, they say our greatest ally Israel. We here say our greatest ally America because we're both founded. We're the only two countries founded on Judeo-Christian values. 82% in the last poll are supportive of Israel in America. But we are concerned that we're seeing a degradation of support in the Democratic Party. It started with people in the squad like Ilhan Omar and AOC who were just lying, Tlaib, who were saying that there's genocide and, taking the information from Hamas and reporting that as news. Then we saw it go to someone as prominent as Chuck Schumer, who called for us to bring down our government during a hot war. We're in the middle of a war fighting for our survival, and he called for our prime minister to resign, which everyone knows what that would mean during war. It'd be chaos. So, of course, there's a lot of concern on the ground now about which direction it's going in, but there's a lot of optimism. Traditionally, Democrats have been very supportive of Israel because of Jewish support, and there's optimism that will continue, but it's now going in the wrong direction.
Last question. Talk about American Jews and why they traditionally and still nowadays vote Democrat.
Well, I think that's an interesting history. It's not just Jews; it's all minorities for a long time voted Democrat because Democrats were the party of liberal values. In the 50s, Jews couldn't join country clubs because of conservative values. They didn't want Jews in the country clubs. So that stuck with a lot of people, and people went that way. Today, in the last election, it was about 70% vote the Democratic Party and 30% vote the Republicans. The people who are voting Republicans are the religious Jews, the Israeli Jews who live in America, and the Russian Jews who live in America. So that community already came towards the Republican Party. The real question is, what will all this anti-Israel sentiment that we're seeing on the streets in America, in the universities, in the media, and within the Democratic Party do in the next election? Things move very slowly. But there could be a huge reaction from the Jewish community. People I know from my family over there, I'm Jewish, my family in Dallas is Jewish, and Albuquerque and California and Florida, all over. They're very nervous. There's a lot of hate crimes. There's unprecedented anti-Semitism. We have to have at our schools, at our synagogues, tons of security. People are scared to walk around with kippahs on their heads. I think that people are starting to really question, who they're going to vote for in the next election, but only time will tell.